Hi, and welcome to this new episode of my podcast debut, where I interview people like John who launched their podcast, and hopefully that gives you the inspiration also to start yours and the knowledge to do it properly. So, thank you so much, John, for joining us today. I'd love to start with asking you what is your podcast about?
My podcast is about exploring the space where work and life meet because I find that we don't do a very adequate exploration of how our work and non work life interface. And even the work life balance term does an injustice to talking about the interconnectedness of what we're doing with entrepreneurial ventures or jobs or various goals and the parts of our life that we think are not that. Everything is actually very connected. And so my podcast is mostly going to be me interviewing people to talk about how they avoid burnout and how they achieve work-life balance, but also to explore how they find their purpose and how they craft and navigate their relationships with their projects.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, that's so interesting because work has become that thing that's separate from life somehow, and we talk about the work-life balance for those reasons. Yeah, that's a important topic, and I'd love to ask you, like, what are your what are your goals with it, like your intentions?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of backstory because it's necessary to explain my current project. Um, when I was very young, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family full of dysfunctional people in a very dysfunctional situation. So by the time I was a teen, I was very stressed out. I wasn't coping with stressors very well. And I decided that I really needed to work on myself in order to just not be miserable. That was my main motivation. But I already had a deep need for um, looking for meaningful activities, having meaningful goals. So I spent 10 years doing a pretty deep dive into a variety of forms of meditation, mindfulness, a lot of yoga, studying Tai Chi, therapeutic massage, and things like that. And the good news for me was that I actually found a lot of things that completely reworked my life so that I was living a much more fulfilled life. And through that journey, I decided that I wanted to help other people. And so I jumped through the academic hoops and got my degrees and credentials and became a psychotherapist. And so that was about 3 decades ago. And because I had come out of a decade of exploration of so called alternative medicine, complementary medicine, and I, throughout my career, have incorporated mindfulness techniques, and especially to help people with mood dysregulation like depression or anxiety and stress and resilience. And during that time, I had the wonderful opportunity to teach for 15 years at Indiana University. And part of what I taught was a full semester stress management course. So I had thousands of students in that course over a 15-year period. I taught it 40 times and had really big classes. And so I got to not only guide people to deepen their own understanding of their minds and their bodies and how they were, trying to cope with stress and guide them to be more resilient. But I think important for me in my career, where it is now and where it's headed, is that having worked with about 10,000 people at this point as patients or students, they have taught me a lot about how people need to be guided, because I can form all sorts of ideas in my head about what I think is right, what I think will work. Um, but I'm less interested in preaching, and I'm more interested in having relationships with people to really deeply transform their lives so that they're more resilient. And so in the recent years, I have gotten curious about exploring how people navigate the relationship between work and life, and how not only how people cope with work stress, but also how people find meaning in work. And that's partly interesting to me because I'm in a field, I work as a therapist. I'm in a field where a lot of people burn out in their first year of their career. A lot of people go through all of the trouble of getting their degrees and getting the credentials, and then they burn out because they can't stand the work. And I used to be a clinical supervisor of new therapists for many years. And part of what I explored with them is how do I guide them not only so they withstand the stress of the job, but they actually form a relationship with their work so that it's enlivening to them and it's sustainable in a positive way. So I got increasingly curious on exploring this. And I even hate to use the term like work life balance because it's like mind body connection. They're not two separate things, right? But we can use that term and understand what we're pointing to at least. But I'm very interested in exploring that with clients as a coach. And I've begun coaching clients. So it's kind of an adjacent but different service than what I've been up to in my therapy career. But I've started coaching people on how to change their relationship with work and how to not only cope with work stress and become better at just generally coping with stress and not being anxious, but also exploring their relationship with their work, relationship with their projects, with their entrepreneurial goals. And interestingly, in researching how to make a podcast, how to post things to YouTube, and also how to pursue my own entrepreneurial ventures, one thing that was interesting to me was that over and over and over, I would see like a business mentor, a business coach talking about how to learn how to run Facebook ad marketing or something like that. They would do an hour-long tutorial, and at the very end, tack on 30 seconds of saying, oh, by the way, it's stressful to be in business for yourself, so try to not burn out. Okay, see ya. And that subject isn't being treated very well. And as you know, when you pursue your ventures, there are a variety of stressful things that you experience on that path. And people watching this video probably are intimately aware as well that when you're trying to pursue your own path, it's not easy. And there are times where we need to stop what we're doing or pivot, but there are times when I think people don't succeed because they get overwhelmed with the challenges, and they also may not have an optimal relationship with their process and their goals. So that's what gets me here to starting this podcast, because I want to share some of what I've thought about and I've learned while studying that over the years, but I also want to talk to people and I want to learn from other people, like, how does that work for you? What's important to you about your relationship with your work? And how do the different facets of so-called non-work life interrelate with the things we call formally work?
Thank you so much, John. Yeah, that's really interesting. On a personal note, I've left my job. My last job was 7 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, and then started on the more entrepreneurial journey. And of course, the old way of, at least for me, of working, where you're more going to the office and being an employee, feels more foreign now, especially living in Ubud, where almost everyone is self-employed. And at the same time, I know there is a lot of burnout and people getting stressed. But I love what you shared also about the coaching industry, for example, which I'm part of, because when we do a coaching business, or even when we do a podcast and try to grow a YouTube channel, I could find myself going back into that kind of hamster wheel of wanting to get more views, wanting to get more subscribers, wanting to get more leads, wanting to make more money. and ending up going back into the rat race that I've left many years ago. So it is also very relevant, I believe, for people like me and you who entrepreneurs do something they're very connected with, they feel is very meaningful. So to me, it's like, yeah, having that balance where, yes, it's amazing if we can find something that is meaningful, aligned with our soul's mission. To me, there's no work-life balance because what I'm doing with my work, with my podcast, with my coaching is fully part of my purpose and what I want to bring into this lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
But there can still be that thread, let's say, of wanting to of doing more and more and wanting to grow all the time and not balancing it properly. So I fully resonate with that. I'm actually curious on your side, like how do you link the podcast with your coaching or your other activities? Do you have any specific goals with, for example, the podcast generating leads and business for your coaching business?
Yes. So I recently, a few months ago, launched a free online community that has the same focus. So I launched the Alchemy Project community on School, and my podcast is called The Alchemy Project. And so I am hoping that the podcast gets some eyes on the community and provides leads so that people, if they watch one of the interviews or something that I talk about on the channel and they're interested in potentially engaging a little more with me and my fellow community members, they can come join for free. And in my free community, I offer some introductory instruction about some of the foundational things that I have found extremely valuable for my clients. I'm in a good position for delivering that there because I have done it for 40 years now. And so I have a pretty well developed system to give people some really good transformations with actually minimal involvement. So it's kind of a good program for an introductory level first step free community. My goal is in May to launch a paid community on School. And in that community, I'm going to do group coaching. So if people get value out of my free community, and I do some group coaching type services in that community as well, but it's more minimal compared to what I'm going to be delivering in the group coaching group that will be separate. But for people who want to be more engaged with me, who may come to me through the free community, then I'll be delivering coaching through the group coaching program. I also do work with people one-on-one. So my podcast might be a path for someone to decide to work more deeply with me as a one-on-one coach. And I have a website too by the same name, Alchemy Project, where people can also find me and set up, free calls and work with me as a coach.
Thank you, John. And that's a really well crafted strategy around the podcast and the business and focus on giving first. So I love what you share here. And also, you speak in a way that's very eloquent and very calm, also. So I'm sure that's already a very good asset for the podcast. And thank you again for coming here. And I have a message to the viewer also. If you consider starting a podcast or you're already in the process or a YouTube channel and you want to come here on the show and discuss it together, check out the link in the description and I'd love to have a chat with you. And like this, that gets you also familiar with Riverside, where the software I use for the interviews, or also just showing up and sharing your message online. I've had a lot of people for whom it's their first podcast, for example. And yeah, thank you, John. Do you have also any questions for me or things that are you feel like challenges that you want to share?
Well, I'll tell you my biggest challenge for trying to perform adequately, and by adequately meaning like you were just talking a minute ago about like how does the podcast fit into the business plan. A challenge for me is that I did not relate to my work in some ways as a therapist and in essential ways that are necessary to be able to perform on platforms like YouTube or with a video podcast. So like I think my biggest challenge in pivoting my career and adding some of these new ventures has been having to develop skill sets with things that weren't natural for me and they weren't part of my former life, and some of them I don't actually find particularly enlivening. I mean, I don't hate them, but for example, video editing, um, it's okay. I would never go into a career as a video editor. But one of the things, unless you start a venture like this with a lot of capital and you can farm it out and hire people to do it, a lot of these skills that you have to apply to adequately, minimally perform are things you're going to have to ramp up on your own. So that was something that I wasn't unaware of it, but I would say, since I started my various entrepreneurial kind of ventures in the last 2 years, I've probably spent 10 hours a week on my projects solidly, consistently for 2 years. And 90% of that 10 hours is probably education and skill building and getting coaching, with 10% actual work. Um, if I had something to say to new podcasters, I would say just be prepared. You're going to develop some new skills. They may not be what you've been doing before. And that's something that I wasn't unaware of. Has definitely been a chore over the last 2 years. It takes persistence to stay in the game when you run into, because like you start a new program like Riverside. I just started using this too, and I think it's a wonderful tool because it does some things to save you time and work. But with any new app or new platform, you have to find out where are all the buttons, and you think there's this simple thing I can do, but I'm going to have a 20-minute chat with the help people just to figure out where I do this and what I do that. And you encounter that left and right with each new piece of the whole system that you're trying to put in place there. So
Yeah, thank you for raising that for sure. And Riverside is a really good example. Actually, I do find that for editing, it's been so helpful and it saves a lot of time. And still, it's good to know what is good with it, how to use it. So, for example, I'm a podcast coach, and part of what I provide with it is a training on how to use Riverside effectively, which is fairly straightforward. It's like 15 to 20 minutes on like how do you what to use to edit to create the clips. But I've lost some times on it. Well, first on doing my market research with other softwares like Descript and this competition, of course, and then also playing with some of the features that are good. Many of them are good. Some are really not good. So, for example, Magic Audio so far is terrible, and they said they're gonna do a new update, but of course they don't tell you that. And then there's a lot of options that maybe we don't use for our podcast. So there are certain ways to do things that will still take a lot of time, even with AI and those new softwares. And where I found us spending quite a bit of time also is actually with AI going so fast and having amazing improvements. Well, that saves a lot of time when you find them, but then the research element actually takes a lot of time. And then I end up spending quite a lot of time on my laptop looking at that new tool that can do that automated for me. So it's a little bit ironic
mhm.
sometimes, but that's something to take into account too. And then also, yeah, even if you use something like Riverside, I create for my client checklists where it's very easy what they do each time they do the episode, because you still have like a few boxes to tick, and if you forgot to tick one and then you export it, you have to redo it. I also use ChatGPT for all my YouTube description, which has been really good. I just put a transcript there and suggest the title. So there is some help, but there is still definitely some work where, as you said, I'm like, I wouldn't want to do that if it wasn't as part of my purpose and my mission. Yes.
Hmm. Yeah. But I think that if you're creative and you are if you properly network, then there are lots of people on the planet who have a collaborative spirit. You know, you were on the school platform, and so my experience there has been, it's just chock full of extremely helpful, friendly, kind people.
Yeah.
And so if you open yourself to positive social energy in the right places, then I think that's a very powerful way to save yourself some time and energy. If you go bury yourself in a hole somewhere with your laptop and an internet connection and try to plow through it yourself, you're going to do 10 times the work, and you can leverage the help of other people who are willing to walk along with you and support you with things. I've found that to be true with a lot of aspects of my business ventures over the last 2 years or so.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And yeah, at the moment I have a business coach with whom I work more on the strategy, who has this cool community. And then there's a couple of people I'm considering also. One's called Harut, one's called Kai, and they have communities also on growing YouTubes. And yeah, that's cool. Ecosystem is definitely very vibrant.
Well, I have a
Can you
question
hear me?
for you,
Yeah.
Alex. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I have not done a lot of, because I'm at the front end of launching this podcast, but obviously I'm creating the videos, I'm uploading them to YouTube. And in some ways, when it's relevant, I'm sharing them in my community. And then when it's relevant with other people on the school platform, I'm letting people know about it. Do you have suggestions of how to improve reach for a video podcast? So beyond what I just said, I mean, are there other things to explore to try to get a wider audience of people who would have the opportunity to engage?
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for asking that, John. I will share what I'm doing with my bigger podcast, which is called The Light Leaders. And my strategy with it is obviously to create good content that resonates with my audience in the first place. And then I leverage YouTube to package it well. So I take some time to think about what's going to be a thumbnail and a title that's going to get people to click on it. And then what's going to be the first minute that's gonna give them a good glimpse and get them engaged. So as part of it, I use Riverside also. I like that I can copy paste text like a Word document, and that edits the video, and I will take 2 or 3 snippets from the episode that I feel creates curiosity and that are aligned with the episode to put at the start. So that's what we call the hook, right? So I work on that for the YouTube strategy. And then I also have an Instagram strategy where I like to interview in general people with a big following. So I do find that in general, you can go about 10 to 20x when you're a podcast host, meaning I have 6,000 followers on my Instagram. I can interview people who have maybe 100,000 followers who will be happy to be on the show because people like to be interviewed. If I go to people who have a million, most likely they won't see me and they won't accept, but I can go in that 10, 20x. And then I do good clips and I do collaborations on those clips, which gives a lot of exposure because with the Instagram collab, when they accept, it shows on their feed and they often share in their story. So all of a sudden, I'm in front of well, probably not 100,000 people, but all the active followers of that person that I interviewed. So that's another strategy that I use to grow the podcast, and that will grow also the Instagram. So I focus on YouTube algorithm and the Instagram collab, and I always take a little bit of time with my guests to ask them also if they have another channel of communication that could be really effective. If they have a big newsletter, I will help to prepare something if they want to share there, or if they have a big YouTube channel, what I've done in the past is either they can post the whole interview a week later, or I create a 10-minute extract with a link to the full interview to leverage that too. So the idea is really about leverage, in my opinion. When I do these things, I
Mhm.
try to leverage the Instagram, the YouTube, and sometimes it's more one, sometimes it's more the other one. But that's the two main strategies.
Cool. Yeah, I am beginning to work my Instagram strategy. I was flailing around being unsuccessful at best. And so I just started working with an Instagram coach, and they're helping me revamp that. And so my expectation is that I'll have enough followers to perhaps pursue that strategy as well and try to leverage collaborating with people with who also have some developed audience.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And of course, it helps if you have a good following already, but that's actually a growth strategy, right? Where you could, I think a lot of people, if they resonate with you and the interview was good and you do clips for them, if they're happy with the clip, they will accept them not just to help you, but also because it's a good clip for them. So then, even if you have 20 followers and they have 100,000, they'll be happy to accept the collab. And all of a sudden, that's a great growth mechanism. I like Riverside for that too, because it can create clips automatically that then I fine tune and also add an end clip, which I find is important, like watch the full episode there or subscribe, or if you want to have a little end clip that's branded also, that makes it easier.
Yeah, that's one thing I liked about Riverside too. I just used it for the first time the other day, and the AI created a bunch of clips, and 3 of them were usable for me, and with a little bit of editing.
Yeah, exactly. I usually use the magic clips and then I will make some modification. I will work a bit on the hook because sometimes it doesn't get the hook so well. But it's a matter of, you know, 10 minutes for 10 to 15 minutes for a good clip, which is very good compared to
Yes.
where it was before. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, John. I'd love to ask you, was this interaction valuable?
Yes. Yeah. I find it enlivening. And also, I'll
Amazing.
tell you, like, part of my uh, work with both my patients and my coaching clients is similar to like you're starting our interaction with check-in so that we can be present and have a relative, sufficiently deep check-in. That's one of the things that I resonate with very strongly, and it's something I teach people too because I try to dispel. Like when people come to me and they say I'm stressed, help me be less stressed. One of the things that I tell them is like you're going to have a paradigm shift because this is not about me like giving you the answer and you plug in the answer and then it works. This is about you changing how you surf that stressor. And one of the changes that's essential is you have to find ways to open to your self awareness because there's stuff in there that actually has the answer. Like more than I could possibly hand you the answer. A lot of it is there, and what we need to do is give permission to ourselves, but also learn how do we check in so that that energy flows in a way that's enlivening for us and that it helps us be productive. And so then the question sometimes is like, do I do that once and then I'm good to go? And it's like, no, you're slipping back into the old paradigm. Like this is something you might have to do it every hour some days. You might have to do it once a week. I mean, like there's check-in has a different purpose than knowledge. If I hand you a book and it's the how-to for something, just keep the book and refer to it when you need it, but you can ignore it the rest of the time because you only need it to be there for those words when you want to read it. But self-awareness is like it's feedback. It's like if I unplug the O2 sensor in my car's engine, the engine will still run, but it won't run well because the computer can't know the oxygen and fuel mixture and control it properly. But if we plug in the sensor, then the engine runs efficiently and it has power when we need power and it has good mileage when we need it to have good mileage. And so I try to teach people that those check-ins as ways of plugging in the correct sensors so that their self-regulation works better.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and you're a meditator yourself, right? So it's almost a practice, not not even every day or every hour, but every second when we can be aware of it, to come back to that full
Mm-mm.
presence and to observe that. So yeah, I like to start like this for sure. And I'd love to ask you also, what are your main takeaways from our conversation today?
Well, I'm inspired by your engagement with the project. So just I like your attitude toward it and your approach. Creating a forum for these discussions is, obviously, it's part of you developing leads for your business, but you're deepening the awareness. You're raising the vibe in the podcast community by doing it. So that's inspiring to me. And so, I mean, that to me is a big takeaway because, as you know, in the business coaching space, there's a lot of superficial, like, let's just make more money, and there's no deeper dive into being human and being real or pursuing meaningful missions than that. And so, um, I want to change the game, and I can see that you are changing the game as well. So to me, that's inspiring that in these emerging and evolving platforms like YouTube and Instagram and whatnot, that we can not just show up and be TikTok sexy or something and get a lot of followers, but we can actually change the game to make the game more meaningful and rich. So that that to me struck me just about your approach to doing the interview. I do appreciate your making yourself open to exploring the mechanics of podcasting too, because you know I come to it with my own weaknesses and the things that are yet to emerge in my work of doing it, and I appreciate your being in that role of guide.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely something I'm playing with on the coaching level. Is how to build a coaching business that's heart centered, and that's really first targeted at helping people, and at the same time understanding the dynamics of coaching, of value exchange, of building a business, and playing with balls, which can be a little bit tricky sometimes. But yeah, with this podcast, I really like the idea of potentially having leads for sure, but also I know in the form you told me very clearly, like, you're not interested in coaching, and that's totally fine, like, because I also want to have a really good conversation, and that's creating content. So it's a lot of different things that I'm doing at the same time. It's lead generation, it's content, it's learning. And so yeah, I'm not obsessed with it has to be a lead, but for sure it is also I believe quite a good strategy to get into the like, when you have a podcast, you can interview people who fit your ideal client also. That's always totally a possibility. Just don't be attached to the idea that they will become one. That's what I'll say.
Mhm.
And with
Mhm.
this also, because we talked about editing, I also don't like to do a lot of editing. And so with this podcast, actually very minor editing. There's a Riverside as my intro, outro automatically, and then I just cut a little bit, like beginning and end. Basically, in 30 to 45 minutes, the episode will be live, and we'll have a clip also that I'll share on Instagram and invite you as a collaborator. Yeah, it's
Cool,
been a pleasure.
cool.
Any last
Well,
share for the audience?
no, just happy to be here. Happy to get to have this conversation with you, and excited to see how collaboration can continue to evolve for both of us and all the people we're connecting with.
Yes, yes, for sure. Actually, networking would be another good one where we can see where that leads. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, everyone who's here watching. Tell us in the comment, what did you learn? Do you have any questions? I read them all, I answer to them all. And also, if you want to support the channel, you can like, subscribe, share this video. Much love to everyone. And thank you, John. Much love to you too.